Chinua Achebe's No Longer at Ease, published in 1960, is a profound exploration of the cultural, political, and moral dilemmas faced by Nigerians in the wake of colonialism. It is the second novel in Achebe's African trilogy, following Things Fall Apart, and focuses on Obi Okonkwo, the grandson of Okonkwo from the first novel. Obi is a Western-educated Nigerian who struggles to balance the expectations of his traditional Igbo background with the demands and temptations of life in a modern, bureaucratic, and increasingly corrupt Lagos. The novel opens dramatically with Obi Okonkwo on trial for accepting a bribe. This framing device immediately sets the tone for the novel's themes of moral conflict and cultural disintegration. The rest of the story is a retrospective narration of how Obi arrived at this point, illustrating his gradual moral decline and the pressures that pushed him toward corruption. Obi Okonkwo has returned to Nigeria after studying English in England on a scholarship sponsored by the Umuofia Progressive Union, UPU, an organization formed by members of his home village. The UPU has high hopes that Obi will become a symbol of success and integrity and expects him to support his family and community while upholding their cultural values. Upon returning, Obi is given a job in the civil service in Lagos, working for the scholarship board. He is determined to bring about change and avoid the rampant corruption that characterizes much of Nigerian public life. At first, Obi resists the bribes and temptations that come his way. He is idealistic and believes that his Western education has prepared him to modernize Nigeria and maintain ethical standards. However, his personal life soon becomes complicated. Obi falls in love with Clara Okiki, a beautiful, Western-educated nurse. But Clara is an Osu, an outcast in traditional Igbo society, and Obi's family and community strongly oppose the relationship. Despite his modern sensibilities, Obi is deeply affected by this rejection and the pressure from his family, especially his mother, who threatens to kill herself if he marries Clara. This emotional conflict puts further strain on Obi's fragile moral foundation. Financial troubles quickly mount. Obi lives beyond his means to maintain a modern lifestyle and pay back his debts. He also sends money to his family and pays back the UPU. His salary is insufficient to support these expenses, especially after Clara leaves him following a botched abortion. The combined emotional and financial pressures eventually push Obi to accept a bribe, just once, then again, and soon, corruption becomes part of his life. By the time the novel returns to the opening trial scene, Obi is a broken man. Despite his good intentions and initial resistance, he succumbs to the very corruption he despised. The novel ends with his conviction, prompting a discussion among the judges about the tragedy of yet another young man falling victim to a corrupt system. Cultural conflict and identity. At its core, No Longer at Ease is a novel about cultural identity and the conflict between tradition and modernity. Obi represents the new generation of Nigerians, educated abroad, cosmopolitan, and seemingly liberated from the constraints of tribal customs. However, Achebe illustrates that Western education alone is insufficient to navigate the complex web of Nigerian society, where traditional values, familial obligations, and colonial legacies intersect. Obi's struggle to marry Clara, an Osu, highlights the enduring power of Igbo traditions. Despite his Western education, Obi cannot entirely free himself from the expectations of his community. His internal conflict is emblematic of the wider cultural crisis facing post-colonial Nigeria, where many young people found themselves no longer at ease in either the traditional world or the new one being shaped by colonial influence. Corruption and moral failure. Corruption is a central theme of the novel. Achebe paints a nuanced picture of how and why corruption thrives, not just as a moral failing but as a survival mechanism in a society under economic and social stress. Obi's descent into corruption is gradual and almost inevitable. Achebe shows that even those with the best intentions are vulnerable when systems are broken and expectations are unrealistic. Obi's moral failure is not portrayed as a simple case of greed or weakness. Instead, it is the result of systemic pressures: low salaries, high expectations from family and community, emotional turmoil, and the normalization of bribery and the bureaucracy. Achebe avoids moralizing, presenting Obi's downfall with sympathy and understanding, which makes the tragedy all the more profound. Colonial legacy and bureaucracy. Achebe also critiques the lingering effects of colonialism, particularly its bureaucratic structures. The civil service in which Obi works is modeled on British systems but is ill-suited to Nigeria's cultural realities. The inefficiencies and injustices of the system contribute to the prevalence of corruption and alienation among civil servants. Obi's Western education, while prestigious, leaves him unprepared to navigate this landscape. The novel suggests that simply replacing colonial rulers with Western-educated Nigerians is not enough. True progress requires rethinking the systems themselves. Irony and tragic structure. Achebe employs irony masterfully throughout the novel. Obi begins his career as a symbol of hope and reform but ends up embodying the very corruption he set out to fight. The title itself, No Longer at Ease, captures the sense of dislocation and unease that Obi feels. He does not belong fully to the traditional world of his ancestors or the modern world he was trained to enter. Obi's story follows a tragic arc reminiscent of classical tragedies. Like a tragic hero, he is brought down not just by external forces but by his internal flaws, pride, indecision, and a certain naivete. This classical structure deepens the emotional impact of the narrative and aligns Achebe's modern African storytelling with universal literary forms. Language and style. Achebe's prose is clear, elegant, and laced with irony. He skillfully blends English with Igbo expressions, proverbs, and cultural references, creating a distinctively Nigerian narrative voice. This blend reflects the novel's central tension between the traditional and the modern.